Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
I was on a mission to find out every strength that every time I came across someone with autism or some disability, I was like, I know there's some like superpower in you somewhere. So I was on a mission to always find that. The first thing that I realized is that once they understood that I was on the mission to find their strength and to help them, become better students and improve their life with their own strength, right? Not with, what I can do for them or whatever, but just kind of, show them where they're strong at. You start to see a totally different change in them. You start to see them appreciate school more.
That's our guest this week, teacher, special father, and author, DeAndrae Hinton. DeAndrae is the special education chair at the Houston, Texas Independent School District. He's also written a book, My Favorite Mistakes, Lessons Learned Through Accountability. He has 2 children, daughter Daja, 19, and son Dillon, 16, who's autistic. He has quite a story to tell, and we'll hear it on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Now say hello to the founder of the Special Fathers Network and host of the Dad to Dad podcast, David Hirsch.
Hi, I'm David Hirsch, host of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. 2 short messages. First, I'd like to thank those who donated more than $1,000 to the 2024 Cycle to End Father Absence campaign. In alphabetical order, they are Ina Bird, Irene and Tom Costello, Kim Duchessois, Damian Navarro, Brad Surratt, Don Stadler, and UBS Financial Services. If you haven't already done so, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org and donate today. Secondly, I'd like to invite you to attend the 4th Annual Special Fathers Network Mastermind Group Weekend Retreat taking place at the Hyatt Regency Chicago, September 6th through the 8th. Attendance is free for Special Fathers Network Mastermind Group dads. Other dads can attend for a small cost. We're budgeting for 30 dads this year, and it's sure to be a memorable experience for all involved. For more information, please see the show notes or simply go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
Now let's listen to this intriguing conversation between DeAndrae Hinton and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with DeAndrae Hinton of Houston, Texas, who's the special education chair at the Houston Independent School District and father of 2, including an autistic son. DeAndrae, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you for having me.
You're the proud father of 2, daughter Daja, 19, and son Dillon, 16, who's autistic. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
I grew up in Houston, Texas. I have an older brother and a younger sister. Well, I was raised by my mother. There's a big difference in age. Well, not me and my brother. My brother's only 6 years older, but my sister was born when I was a senior in high school. So that was fun because, I was always good with kids. And so I wouldn't have a problem with having her all the time. So a lot of people thought she was my kid. And she recently had her own baby. I think he's maybe like 4 or 5 months, and they called me Grunkle, like Grandpa Uncle, like because I would come home from football practice, pick her up from the babysitter, come home, feed. It was like it didn't bother me, so it was kind of fun to me. So I've always had a thing with children, right? Whether it was babies or teaching in elementary age, it was always fun for me and somewhat easy.
Yeah, well, I guess your younger sister gets attribution for helping acclimate you to the world of working with young kids.
Absolutely.
Out of curiosity, what did your dad do for a living?
My dad is from Nigeria. So he came to this country, I think, when he was 33. And from when I remember way back, he started off driving taxi cabs. And so that's all I remember as a young child, that he drove taxi cab. And then I do remember when I went to his graduation. And again, as a child, I'm not thinking about, okay, this is a guy who migrated from Africa and had to drive a taxi to pay his school. And then I wasn't thinking about the dynamic of everything he did. I'm just looking at yellow car one day. Then one day we're going to this school and I'm watching a graduation. And he eventually started working at Baylor College of Medicine as a cardiovascular scientist. And I remember just those days of certain things are just so small for kids. For me, it was going there and being able to put on a lab coat. I have no idea why that just made my day, made my year. But just going in to work with him and watching him, mix all these chemicals and do run tests, and I'm just sitting there with my lab coat and my goggles, and it's just like, it was just awesome. And then from there, he started his own healthcare company in which, they provide healthcare to senior citizens at their homes. And, it's crazy how, I'm just thinking about all of the stuff that my dad did and, kind of looking at my path. It's like, wow, it's just hitting me that a lot of this stuff is aligned and I didn't even think about it. I was one of those kids that grew up like, I didn't want to be exactly like my dad. I wanted to be my own self. And then I learned that, subconsciously, when you keep that in your mind, you end up, going down that path. So I feel like it all worked out.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Very interesting. And where does your dad live now?
He still lives here, but he does have his company in Africa. So right now he's currently in Liberia.
Oh, really? Okay. Very interesting. So he's been able to straddle the world of the U.S. and Africa, not Nigeria like originally, but in Liberia.
Yes. I mean, he definitely still goes back home. Most of his family's still there. So he definitely still goes back home to Nigeria. But since business is in Liberia, that's where he spends a lot of time these days.
Very interesting. Thanks. So how would you characterize your relationship with your dad?
It's unique. I would say that. And for a long time, I had to realize that relationships with fathers are just different. So because of how we were, I used to think that something was wrong, right? That it wasn't too much communication, but, he did teach me a lot. It just wasn't a lot of daily communication, ongoing conversations all the time. And so at first I used to think that that was so wrong because, everyone else would talk about how they talk to their dad and they're close and this and that. But, I never kind of experienced that closeness. But I feel like that also helped me discover my own thinking process, right? I didn't have anybody to tell me how to think, how to be, how this. I learned, on my own, and still to come to a lot of, mutual thinking processes between me and him, even though we didn't communicate all the time. The fact that I still, grew up and kind of shared a lot of his ideals anyway, I kind of learned to appreciate that. It was like, I kind of appreciate my dad allowing me to learn certain things through life on my own so I can have my own view of how things are. I also feel like that was probably a key component to me being able to accept my son's diagnosis, right? Because I think if I had some type of a thought process of how to raise a son, how to raise my son, like if I already had that in my head, then it probably wouldn't align with autism, because back when I was being raised, autism was not that popular and it wasn't even that researched, right? So I don't think anybody back when could teach me how to raise a kid on the spectrum. So, like I said, I definitely found a new appreciation, especially when my son came to move in with me. I found a new appreciation of how I even was brought up.
Thanks for sharing. So any important takeaways when you think about your relationship with your dad, lessons learned that you've tried to perhaps incorporate into your own fathering?
Yes, just simply that it's no right or wrong. Right? Like, just saying, you're growing up, you're thinking there's a right or wrong all the time. And you're thinking that, okay, well, this must not be the way I should. I must have messed up, right? Which goes into the title of my book, right? It's like my favorite mistakes. But then I learned quickly that they weren't mistakes. They were just lessons I've learned. And so the key takeaways, again, is just that being able to navigate my own journey in fatherhood, navigate my own journey in raising a child on the spectrum. I think that was the best thing he could have done for me.
Yeah, well, it sounds like he created this independence, right, that you're making reference to, right? Independent thinking and independent way of doing things, which, I think that's the goal of most parents, is that they want their children to be independent, right? Not relying on them or some other people for that matter. So I'm thinking about other father influencers. I'm wondering what, if any, influence your grandfathers had, first on your dad's side.
Well, fortunately, I'd never met my grandfather on my dad's side. He was in Nigeria and he passed away before I've even got a chance to even visit Africa. And my grandfather on my mom's side, he died when I was pretty young. I don't have too many memories of him. The one thing I do remember is he was affectionate. And that was rare back then. I guess raised being like, have to be tough. You got to be, and to see my grandfather, every time he sees me, he's hugging me and kissing me on the cheek. And it's like, it didn't bother me. It was just weird, right? Like everyone's teaching me to be strong in this, but then I have a grandfather who's showing me that you can also be affectionate, because I don't never remember anyone saying my grandfather was soft. Don't get me wrong, right? So that's what, it was just like, I really take away the idea that you could possibly, as a man, you can be a provider, protector, tough, strict, but you can also have an affectionate side. And if anybody who's around me and my son, like you see that all the time. It's like we can play fight for, and talk trash, like who's tougher, who's bigger. But then 5 minutes later, he's coming to my room, checking on me, saying, "How you doing, Dad?" Giving me a hug. It's just like, it's just like an even exchange. And so, I definitely credit that to my grandfather.
Thanks for sharing. So I'm thinking about other father figures, and I remember reading in the book that there were a number of people that you cited. One of them was Sean Miller. I think he was a barber. What influence did he have on your life?
Oh, well, he's still my barber. I saw him a couple days ago. So, hey,
Wait a second. It doesn't look like you have much hair. What are you talking about, barber?
Right. I know. Yeah. Thanks to him. Right. No, honestly, I want to say he was a really huge impact. One, he was my son's barber as well. Like, so when I had he was mine since I was a teenager. And then when I had my son, I brought him around. But one of the things that I can say about my barber, first, I am glad that he had such an influence in me, because I saw him more than most guys, right? I'm on every week, every 2 weeks, I'm in the barbershop, right? And what I remember most, and still to this day, is that when I'm coming in, whether it's a Saturday, Sunday, or whatever, I'm barbershop talk, you're hearing all the guys talking. But when I get in the chair, he says, "How's your week been? How many tackles did you get in the football game? How'd you grades? How does that last test you were telling me about? How did you, never once?" And I'll be honest, like the barbershop wasn't in the best part of town, right? So a lot of the conversations, a lot of things that you hear people are doing isn't, too legal or isn't too moral. And I will say this, he was a military guy. So he's never been the type of person that praised that type of lifestyle. So it was like when I got in the chair, it was like a different energy. And he's one to ask me about more positive things, more things that I've accomplished, And I think that really made an impact on me, because subconsciously, every time I knew I was going to the barbershop, I needed a good story, right? I needed to be able to say, "Hey, I sacked the quarterback," or I had a couple tackles, or my grades came up, or I don't think he cared if I had 2 or 3 girlfriends running around, or this and this and that. He never asked me any of that stereotypical things. He was always, and it was even a point where, I was struggling in school. It was getting pretty difficult with my son, and just continuing to push for my degree while dealing with him, because, again, other than autism, he was born 3 months premature. So it was a lot of medical things that we had to deal with. So it was definitely hard working full time, going to school full time, and then having to go back and forth to the hospital and take care of him. But it was one time when I approached him and I was like, "Hey, I was thinking about the military." Like, I'm like, "Man, the school stuff, everything, I want it to be just simple." And, and he no one was in the barbershop at the time. And he sat me down and he was just like, "Hey, you don't need to do that." And I'm wondering why. He's like, "Out of everybody in this barbershop that comes in and out, I feel like you have everything you need up here." He says, he told me, he's like, "Man, you've always been driven. I watched you raise both of your children. I've watched you, continue to fight and stick with school. And so he's like, you don't need that. Your life is going to get hard. Life is going to get tough, but I believe in you. And I wouldn't recommend that you would go to the Army. If I would recommend someone who honestly didn't have future plans or didn't have a strong head on their shoulders or things like that. But for you, I would not even recommend it." And that, I want to say, that conversation alone had me go right back to school and retake that test. The special education certification test, I had to take it like twice, so I went back again. I mean, it was that, just stuff like that just kind of continued to help me continue to push, and almost had probably one of the biggest pivotal moments in my life to where, okay, I shouldn't second guess myself. So he definitely had a huge impact as a father figure growing up, as well as, One of my good friends who I went to graduated with, he's also part of the Autism Dads Club, Social Club. And one of the things that I said as I was writing my book was, I want to find his dad and give him a copy because I need to let him know how much it meant to me hearing him screaming my name and calling in football games, because my dad didn't, he didn't make, too many of them. And so at first it was kind of like, hey, why is this other dad like screaming for me so much? I mean, don't get me wrong, he definitely supported his own son, but just having, another dad like, hey, good job, this, and I'm like, why? It at first it was like, wait, because my own dad wasn't here, so I wasn't used to it, but it became like the only thing I had in the stands, right? And it always helped that he had one of those voices that you can hear in a crowd of 10,000, right? You can always hear that one guy. And fortunately, like I said, a lot of things came together. So when my good friend, we reconnected and he was talking to me, his son was diagnosed with autism. And so he saw that I was a part of this organization, and he reached out to me, and I was just like, well, this is a sign. I said, hey, man, I have my book. I really need to give it to your dad. I really need to. And he actually was able to make that happen. We met up and I was able to give him a book and explain to him like how much it meant to me. Just hearing that, as a kid playing ball and I even told him, I was like, man, there was times I want to stop writing, but I could hear in his voice, like, hey man, good job writing that paragraph, or, good job finishing that chapter or something. And it's like, it kind of just, for some random reason, just really just kind of helped me stick to it, help me keep going. Definitely another powerful influence in my life, whether they knew it at the time or not.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Anybody else that played a influential role from a father figure perspective?
I want to say my basketball coach in middle school. His name is Coach Edward Lamar. He's still coaching to this day. And again, my son came full circle. When he moved in with me, he was able to play on my coach's basketball team. So it was like their first game in the summer just brought back so many memories. I was like I almost cried hearing my son get yelled at the same way I did. It was just like beautiful. I was just like, yes. Like it bring me back so many memories, man. And it was cool. And, I want to say he had a huge impact because he didn't care where you were. He would coach you wherever you were. And no matter, the talent, the athleticism on the team, he would coach everybody. And he had high expectations for everyone. Not only that, he was, is a faithful man. And, I'm talking every time we talk to him, he's letting us know about God and how he changed his life. And it was just all positive. On the court, you better, pay attention because he'll throw a basketball in your face. But, after practice, he'd pull you to the side and kind of let you know things out of him. And just seeing him go so far above and beyond for me and other people on the team, because that also has an impact when your kids see how much you do for other kids. It's like, we really had that trust that not only was he, in our lives because, he was a coach and that's what he did, but all the things that he did after practice and after school and all the things, it never left. And it definitely stuck with me as I also became an educator.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing about Coach Lamar. So my recollection was that you went to the University of Houston, got a bachelor's degree in special ed and teaching, and then you took a master's degree in education, leadership, and admin from University of St. Thomas. Did you always think that you were going to be in education, or was there a step or two before that?
Honestly, I did. I want to say it goes back to 10th grade, and I was in my government class. And I was trying to explain to him how I was so confused at why I was able to tutor kids in algebra and I failed it. I'm like, I had to go to summer school, but before school ended, I have a group of kids after school and I'm, teaching them how to do these problems. And I'm like, I don't understand how I couldn't do it. I was telling him that and he said, maybe you should think about being a teacher. And I was like, I never thought about that. What teachers do have is the ability to simply explain information in a way that the other person understands it. So it's like you get to know the person and see how they're thinking, and then you figure out how to explain it in their terms. That's where we get great teachers from. And yeah, so from an early age, I kind of knew teaching and education was going to be in my future. It wasn't until I left my first college, was Texas Southern University, and I took a few classes at Houston Community College before I ultimately went to U of H in Clear Lake to graduate. I took an intro to special education. I'm not sure if it was the way that the guy taught the class or the fact that the information was so interesting to me. After I took the class, I changed my major. I've been interested in special education. Like I was interested in the different ways of thinking and the different ways that their minds worked. And I was just like, for some reason, I just continued to be more involved. Also too, just thinking back in high school, how, we would understand, but we knew that there was that one class where, most of the students who, were on the lower functioning, all that was in that class. And I would see myself, just interested in why they were the way that they were. I also would ask myself, what talents do they do have? Because we did have a kid back in high school who now I understand had autism. On one day, he's jumping on tables saying he's a ninja. By the time I graduated and I met him again in Houston Community College, I was doing work study in the performing arts studio. And I see the kid walk in. And I'm just sitting there like, I know what class you were in high school. Why are you here? He said, hey, one of these piano rooms that we had private piano rooms. Hey, can I get in there? I'm like, there's no one here. Why not? I let the guy in there. When I tell you he played songs so smoothly, singing and playing the piano, it was just like, oh my God. Right. And so from then on, I kind of I was on a mission to find out every strength that every time I came across someone with autism or some disability, I was like, I know there's some superpower in you somewhere. So I was on a mission to always find that kind of, stuck with me, because even in the classroom, like when I became a teacher and I was in the behavior class, so I had all kinds of disabilities in my class. The first thing that I realized is that once they understood that I was on the mission to find their strength and to help them, become better students and improve their life with their own strength, right? Not with, what I can do for them or whatever, but just kind of, show them where they're strong at. You start to see a totally different change in them. You start to see them appreciate school more. Because, honestly, like by the time I get a kid, because my kids weren't from my school, they would always come from different schools, because to get in my class, you have to be arted in. So you definitely had to do a number of things in your previous school to finally get to me. So by the time they get to me, their whole ideal of school is shot. Right. I've been put out. I've been in trouble. I've gone home and got in trouble. So school is the worst thing in my life right now. And then after a few months, it's like, okay, I start getting emails and texts from parents like, my child likes school now, or I would come to, they would come to the ARD meetings and tell me how they come home happier.
Yeah, well, it's great that you found your calling so early in life, and that it's something that, you might not have thought you had a talent or a skill in, like you were saying, but, it's obviously one of your superpowers. And you didn't say this, but my observation is that you've taken a student-centric approach to teaching as opposed to a teacher-centric approach, right? A lot of teachers have their own way of doing things, right? And it works for a certain percentage of the class, and, it's very efficient way, right, for people to conduct themselves. And, taking a student approach requires a little bit higher level of attention to detail and customizing, sort of the learning plans, if you will. And I know that that's part and parcel with the special education world, is having IEPs and trying to figure out, what each student's strength is and trying to tailor a program that's going to help them reach their full potential. So anyway, it's always great to meet people like yourself. So let's talk about special needs now on a personal level. What is Dillon's diagnosis, and how did it come about, or diagnoses, and how did they come about?
Okay. So Dillon was diagnosed at around 2 or 3 with autism. But like I said, he was born 3 months premature. He was about 1.6 when he was born.
Wow.
And it was a very unique story. Middle of the night, his mom's like, hey, something's wrong. I shouldn't feel like this at this point in my pregnancy. Next thing you know, water broke, and we're 6 months in and we're on the way to the hospital. Funny thing is, that same night, it was like I'm being dad to my daughter because I had her that weekend and she had a fever. So I'm nursing her and running back to the bedroom because, Dillon's mom is not feeling too well. And so going back and forth, and then finally she says, I think my water broke. And then now I'm like, okay, we got to pack everything and go. So We got there. Of course, they immediately took her and, had to have an emergency surgery. My daughter, at least at that point, was like maybe 2 a.m, so she finally fell asleep. But the doctor was saying like, hey, we have to rush to get him to the NICU. But if you sit by the elevator, from the time that it takes the elevator to come down, you can see your son. And I was torn because I'm like, mom is still like knocked out, right? And I didn't want to, see him without her. But, at the same time, it was, my first son. And I was sitting with my daughter. We were sitting in front of the elevators and here they come. He's in this little, I won't say cage, but it was like, looked like a bubble. And they rolled him by and it took about maybe 30 seconds for the elevator to come. So I was able to see him for about 30 seconds. And then they took him on. It was definitely a experience, right? Like just seeing your child. Honestly, right? Like he was born in 6 months. So all of his body features weren't, developed. So it was scary, right? Like not knowing if he's going to make it. But I want to say that was like one of those moments where it was like, all right, you're in it now. Like we're here. Like for the rest of his life, this is what you're going to be dealing with. So, it kind of, that initial like worry and like scary, right? You're worried, you're scared, you're all kind of stuff as a dad, even though we don't admit it, like we talked about earlier, like you don't want to talk about help, right? I didn't want to show it. I didn't want to admit it, but it was definitely scary. And thank God he was definitely a miracle baby. He survived. He had about 4 or 5 surgeries while in there. No, I'm going to say 3 or 4 surgeries while in the hospital with those 3 months. And then about 4 or 5 after he got home.
So those surgeries weren't related to the autism because that was super early on. What were they related to?
So he had a procedure to close a hole in his heart. He had a couple of retina reattachment surgeries. And I put them in the book. I just, so many you can't remember the exact names. But I do remember he came home on an oxygen tank. And then after he got home, he had a few surgeries to repair hernia. He had his tonsils removed. I think he had a collapsed lung and had to have surgery on that. He also had a few cataract surgeries. So officially, he has a autism diagnosis as well as a visual impairment.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a very precarious entry into the world, Dillon's entry, that is. And I do have a little experience in that area. Our oldest daughter was about 8 weeks premature, and she weighed considerably more. I think it was 3 pounds, 6 ounces. But it looked like a science fair project, right? With all these tubes and, wires and everything, all the monitors. And then you get to the day that they're ready to go home and they just unplug everything and they say, here's your child, right?
Right.
Like, well, if they needed all that stuff, 5 minutes ago, how are they going to be okay without it right now? And you just have to take a leap of faith and say, hey, maybe they're ready. Let's go with this, right? Like you were saying, you're in it. You just have to sort of dig a little bit deeper and, try to be as focused and present as you can be. So thanks for sharing. So at that early age, he's going home at 3 months, he's on oxygen. What were some of the fears that you had as parents with a child with these type of challenges?
Well, number one, the biggest concern to me was one of his surgeries. They had to go, I guess had a feeding tube. So they had to definitely go through his nose all the way down. And I want to say there was another surgery that they had to go through his throat. Either way, at some point in time, it was scratched. And I remember also one day they came in and he had managed to pull his feeding tube out of his mouth as a baby. It was interesting. And so one of the things that they said was that scratching his vocal cord, you couldn't hear him cry. Like he was screaming, but there was nothing that came out. Most of my biggest concern was, how do we know, he's needing help or this and that. So we actually had to come home with a heart monitor. It's something like a baby monitor, but it just lets us know when his heart elevated. That doesn't necessarily mean he's crying, but it lets us know to go check. And then he had an oxygen tank. And I do remember the first time I take him to his doctor's appointment on my own when his mom was at work. I was scared out of my mind because I'm like, I've never worked an oxygen tank. And so I wasn't even sure if it was on or not. I don't know if I did it the right way. All I know was we went to the hospital and we made it back and he was still alive. So I was like, hey, I must have did something right. But I honestly couldn't even tell you if I turned the knob the right way or if but it was definitely scary. I'll be honest with you. It was scary. The doctor said something about it before we took him home. And he said, none of this is going to affect him in a major way in life. He just may not be the world's best singer. And so I said, when he was like 2 years old, one of the first signs is that he was so musically inclined. Like before learning how to form his own sentences, he learned how to sing songs. And he would sing them as loud as he possibly could. And I'm like, well, he heard that doctor, right? Like he heard that doctor, and all he did was, growing up at 1, 2 years old, was sing songs. I mean, that was his thing to do. It still is his past. I mean, he's a music head, He just wanted to sing every song he heard on the radio all day long. And I always thought about what that doctor had said. And I was like, he must have heard you, and he must have, understood what you were saying. And he was like, nah, I'm going to show you.
So was there any meaningful advice you got early on, either from the medical community or friends or relatives for that matter?
Even though there wasn't too much experience, I still would credit my mom and a lot of the insight that I had in raising him, because she would always treat him as there was nothing wrong, right? She would see, he was born with echolalia. I wouldn't say born with it, but he developed it as, growing up, so you would, hey, good morning, Dillon. Instead of saying good morning, he'd say, hey, good morning, Dillon. Like he'd just simply repeat you all day. Well, my mom had lived with me for a few months, her and my little sister, after my son was born. And I remember, every night they would practice talking. And eventually that echolalia went away because he learned how to think when he would talk. And like I said, I credited my mom because although she knew his diagnosis, and although she knew, the medical history, she still was like, no, he's the same as everyone else. Like he needs to, experience life like everyone else does.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing very important insight about your mom's high expectations and not treating him any differently than anybody else. So what impact has Dillon's situation had on his older sister or your extended family for that matter?
I want to say his older sister was like mom. I mean, she had that personality. Growing up, she was a tough one. I knew she was going to be tough from early on. Her mother had a child before her, so she had an older sister. But I do remember as a baby, 1 or 2 years old, like she would be the one taking up for her sister, like, protecting her sister. I would even bring her to the barbershop and she would, the guys are talking noise. One of the other barbers is talking to me, and she's like, "Dad, can I get down and go hit him?" It's like, and so she was protective. So, when her brother came, it was a natural thing to always protect him, and like I said, it was like another mom.
How about your extended family?
I couldn't ask for more. The attitude of my extended family was awesome. I mean, they always wanted me to bring him. They always wanted him around. Just kind of treated him like there was nothing else wrong. And so he always had a great time anytime we went around my family. I like to joke with everyone, like, I might be the one on the spectrum because when we get around, he is the most social person in the world. I mean, he talks to everybody, and where do you find me? Oh, somewhere in the corner on my phone. Like, and I'm like, that's just how it is. It's like, and that's one of the things I appreciate so much about my son. It's because it's like no one notices that I'm introverted when he's there, because all the attention's on him and everything's great. But it's like yin and yang, and we get along and we make it work.
Thanks for sharing. So I'm thinking about supporting organizations. I'm wondering what organizations Dillon has benefited from.
I want to say, government assistance was definitely a big help. SSI was definitely helpful because, he was, 3 months in that hospital. So they covered, transport, gas, reimbursements, and even parking at the hospital was covered.
So I'm sort of curious to know if there's any other organizations that Dillon has benefited from.
Autism Speaks. They are a good help. I believe they even help with providing advocates for parents if they need it. They were a big help. They also are a big help with our Autism Dads Social Club, right? They helped us with events and help us bring awareness to a lot of the parents. I would even go forth and say that I learned a lot through the Texas Workforce Commission. And typically you would think about that as a unemployment office, right? If you need assistance with getting a job or assistance with living assistance, then that's where you would go. But I learned that there was a lot of resources for individuals with special needs. Starting at the age of 16, when it comes with job placement, when it comes with job coaching. I even mentioned the Texas School for the Blind, where my son is currently at their camp. The Texas Workforce Commission, for those who qualified to go to the camp, if they didn't have transportation, they would provide that transportation from Houston to Austin, for parents that just simply cannot afford it. So Texas Workforce Commission has definitely been a huge resource that has been around for ages that parents simply didn't know to go to them for resources for their, growing child for when they do transition. I want to say Hope for Three is another good resource for parents. Again, they give parents assistance on providing advocates when they need them, because it is a struggle. As a parent, it is a struggle to fight for your child's accommodations, a fight for your child's rights within special education. And advocates are extremely important. And they're extremely important. As a department chair, I'm often on the other side of the table of those advocates. And, don't get me wrong, after about 2 or 3 hours of going back and forth with them, I'm like, sheesh, but after the meetings, I'm always getting their business cards, because I'm like, as a parent of a student with autism, I love the fact that you're that specific. I love the fact that you're that hawkish on every I being dotted and every T being crossed as it comes down to this student's IEP.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
Especially in a self-contained special education class, a behavior class, you got to find them on, because, everyone won't share that thought process, right? That they won't share that, these kids do need to be rehabilitated, right? They won't share that, hey, we do need more men in elementary to help become a positive role model versus to just house the ones that we can't handle. So, again, it's like, that's that intrinsic reward that they talk to you about when you're approaching education as a career choice. It's like, look, you're not going to be the highest paid. You're not even going to get the recognition. So you're going to have to find the intrinsic rewards that come along with teaching. And so that was one of the ones I found. It was like, they may not help me with that process here in this class or here in this district, but I do know the impact that I had on their lives when they go to another place and they say, okay, well, yeah, we see your IEP says self-contained, but you've been doing great in this class. So, we're going to keep you right where you belong.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. So let's talk about the Autism Dads Social Club, founded in 2022. Co-founders Jonathan Chisholm, Emmanuel Arwolowo, and Jesse Esparza. What's the mission of the organization, and what's the backstory there?
Well, the backstory is another one of those, me being in education, coming across another resource, right? So I'm at work and I got an email from the school counselor, and she says, hey, there's just a couple of support groups for parents. I know, Dillon has autism, and you can use that, as well as if any parents, from the special education department, need these resources, I can share. So one of them was Autism Dads Club. So I saw it, and I came across their Facebook page. I reached out. I'm definitely interested. I'm a father, gave my stats. And so, I showed up, and just the inviting energy is what got me. Immediately being greeted, sharing my story, meeting other dads and hearing their stories. And I also want to say, like, seeing how the founders really cared about each dad, each story. Immediately after meeting the dads, we just all got into this whole, we need to exchange resources, right? If I know about this, then I'm going to share with the dads. I know about, certain things I'm going to share with the dads. I mean, I definitely share a lot because of the fact that I'm all, in education. And a lot of the dads in the group now, their kids haven't reached that middle school level. So I'm at a position where I'm able to let them know, hey, this is coming up. This is the things that you need to know. This is the things that you need to ask for from the day one. This is the things that you need to reach out to, And so just kind of giving everybody like a heads up on some of the things that are available for kids. Also, another thing that really just, brought me into the organization is when I went to the first family event. I'm looking at all of the parents that are bringing their kids out, like I said, all different levels on the spectrum. You have those the kids that are on the spectrum that, again, have those reactions to overstimulated and, sensory, right? So you got parents that just, it's second nature to hold them, right? Hold them, grab them like, hey, calm down, sit down. The look on the parent's face when I get to walk by and say, hey, you can let them go, right? Let them go. Like everyone in here is a parent of, so we're all looking out for each other. All the dads are looking out for all the kids. Like the relief on their face to be able to let their kid go, knowing that it's in a trusted environment. It was everything, because as a parent raising a kid, that's your biggest concern. Like what's going to happen if he has a meltdown? What's going to happen if this and that, and not, and knowing that, especially if back then, raising my son, if there was like, if I knew of a support group that every time we got together, it was one of those, let your son roam free. It was like, wow, and so seeing the actual work that they do for the community, seeing the genuine care that they have for dads, it was like, man, I want to be a part as much as I possibly can. And so, earlier this year when they invited me to be on the executive committee and helping out with the planning and the organization of certain things, man, it was, of course, And I do want to give credit to Jonathan Chisholm, right, one of the founders. When I first told him, because like I said, me writing was kind of a inside thing, right? Like not a lot of people knew that. And so even telling people that I was writing a book, when I told him, and keep in mind, Jonathan's a college professor, so when I'm telling him, I'm like, hey, I want to write a book and I'm going to write about my son and the experiences that I had as a single father, as raising him one-on-one, he was like, man, you need to. He was like, parents need to hear your story. And he was one of the first people that I sent my final draft to. I sent it to him on a week before we were set to meet up with the Autism Dads Club. And the day of, he sends me a text. He's like, hey, man, I just started reading your book. It was pretty cool, right? It's starting off. I'm on, page 5 or something. So, oh, okay, cool. He started to read it. 20 minutes later, he's like, I'm on page 15, man. I can't stop, right? And then, about an hour later, he's like, so I'm like, okay, this must be. I'm like, because my thing is, he reads papers all the time, right? Like that he's a college professor. So when I get that type of feedback from that, for someone like that, it's like, okay. I also want to credit him because, again, I still say that, part of me still had that introverted, that personality. And when we met up with the dads, I hadn't even talked about it yet. Oh, he talked about it in front of everyone, but it put me in a situation where I had to. And it was like several times, since I've released the book, I've been put in situations where I normally wouldn't talk. I normally wouldn't speak in front of a group of people, or I normally wouldn't. But I want to say like that day that he did that and put me in the position where I wasn't prepared to talk, but I had to anyway. I definitely give him credit for that push, right? That, if you are going to put a project this powerful, you have to step outside of your norm. You have to get outside of that introverted mentality and be willing to speak to people and talk to people and kind of like be a walking billboard, right? Kind of advertising what you have and what you're trying to put out there. And so, again, I credit that to him and just the other members of the group and how they've been so encouraging. They've even sponsored one of my first book signing events, and we did a book talk, and then it was pretty amazing just to see all the support and the people that came out.
It sounds like the Autism Dads Social Club has been a great connection for you. Out of curiosity, how many members are there? Executive
committee is going to be 4 of us, but then charter members, I want to say we have about 10 or 12.
Okay.
And then we just, Saturday we had, maybe 3 or 4 new dads that came along. So, between then and now we could be up that number.
Excellent. Well, I'm hoping that that just continues to evolve and grow. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit more about the book that you've been making reference to, the title of which is My Favorite Mistakes, Lessons Learned Through Accountability. And the word mistakes has a line drawn through it. So I guess the implication is my favorite lessons learned through accountability. The book came out in March of 2024, and you've talked a little bit about it. And what I enjoyed most about the book were the lists that you prepared. Certain lists were for parents, what to do, how to do things with your other lists were for educators, right? Because you've got a decade plus experience being in the classroom. And there were some favorite phrases that jumped out of the book. And one was from a woman by the name of Rhonda Crossfield. And the phrase is, fix your face. And I'm wondering if you could share the backstory on that.
Absolutely. So Ms. Crossfield is a teacher that I met at the school that I'm at now. I'm actually transitioning to a different school for next year, back in the behavior class, because that's where I am. That's where I'm from. That's home for me. But working with teachers, right? Being a department chair, working with teachers, that was another level of influence that I was able to get, right? So me and Ms. Crossfield became close because she's a veteran teacher. I mean, has 42 years under her belt, so she's seen everything. So there's times where she would see my frustration with then having a position like that. And just like you said earlier, we don't like to talk about, a lot of the things. We don't like to ask for help. But she was one of those people that can just look at you and tell something's going on. And so one day she came in my office and, she's, asking me a question. I'm letting her know, I'm giving her answers and stuff like that. And then she leaves. But out of nowhere, she comes back. And I didn't know she was back in my office. It took me a while to finally look up and see that she's still there. And as soon as I looked up, she's like, fix your face. Don't let those people stress you out. She had no idea what was going on. I didn't tell anybody, and I just couldn't do anything but smile because it was like, I can't lie and say you're wrong, right? Clearly, you can tell that something was going on and I'm just trying to push through it. But when she said that, it took me back to my own mom, right? Like some of the things that she would tell me, like encouraging things, like, and so it was like, yes, ma'am. No words, no explanations. Yes, ma'am. And from then on, it was hard to allow certain things to get me frustrated. All right. I want to shout out another person, which I did talk about in my book. Her name is Dr. Colleen Vasquez. She was my principal during my elementary years. And when I talked to her about the next position that I was getting as a department chair, she said the one thing that I didn't think about. She said, I think you're going to do great simply because you've been able to handle all of the situations that we threw at you as a special education teacher in the behavior class. Not only that, in my own self-contained class, I have to manage all those behaviors. When a fight breaks out in this hallway down there, who has to go do it? Well, if this class gets too out of hand, who has to go? So there were times where teachers didn't even know that I was a teacher myself. And so they're calling or they're, sending me messages like, hey, we need your assistance. And they're becoming frustrated because I'm not there because they think that I'm an administrator, that I'm, supposed to come every time, something's going on. So just imagine being pulled in so many different directions, as well as still having to meet the special needs of your own students, right? It was some very, very challenging times, right? One of the situations that I came in that I didn't include in the book was that I had 2 students the pandemic year, and those kids had never been to school before, even prior to that. They both are AU. They were 9 and 10, 4th grade, 5th grade level. But the 10-year-old who could talk a little bit, maybe on the 1st grade level, like I said, they never had been to school. The nonverbal student would express his frustration by spitting. And back then, of course, during the pandemic year, any bodily fluid means your entire class was evacuated out of that room, and they came in and, they sterilized everything. Like that was the procedure. So it was extremely frustrating, especially knowing that they placed those kids in my class simply to house them until they got their evaluations so they could get to the correct class. So of course they come in, oh, it's going to be, maybe 2 weeks. That's it, and then we'll take all the rest of your kids and put them in. I had those boys for 3 months and them taking my other kids out of my class so I can only deal with them lasted maybe a week. right? So I had those boys plus the rest of my class, plus a kid with spina bifida. So I had to, it was a lot. But the fact that I overcame all of that, I figured out how to manage all of that. I figured out how to make that work, right? She was like, most teachers would have quit. I didn't have a planning period. I didn't have a lunch. Like most teachers would have quit. And she said, she just reminded me, the fact that you were always the person everyone called when things went wrong. The fact that, even when parents, came aggressively toward the principal, they would get on the intercom and say, hey, hey, Mr. Hinton, we need you to come fix the printer. No one touches the printer. So I know what that means. Right. It was a lot that I had to support at the school, but I can't lie and say I didn't have a lot of support from my principal. So it, in the moment, it's almost like, okay, yeah, it's a lot. But the fact that I know she supports me, I didn't feel it as much, even though, again, there were just certain frustrational times that year, just all over. But the fact that I had her support, it made it easier for me to become support for other people. But like that influence that from her, just like, Miss Crossfield, kind of giving me that old school mom type of advice. A lot of that stuff kind of helped me throughout my career in dealing with the most challenging times.
I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up.
I guess the one thing that I would like to say is, I want to say one of the most important lessons that I learned, which is get to know your child more than you know their disability. Because, and guilty as I was myself, once they got the diagnosis, I immediately went diving in literature and just like, hey, what do I do? What can I do? This and this and that. And I want to say throughout his life, I kind of had that approach, right? Like I put autism before him. And I had to learn quickly, like, wait a minute, he has his own personality. He has his own feelings. He has his own emotions. It might look different, but he still has them. And so I need to get to know him. I need to know Dillon, not the autistic son that I'm raising, not the kid that's on the spectrum in school, but Dillon the person. And once I did that, and we've always been close. Don't get me wrong. Like we've been, Batman and Robin ever since he was a baby. As parents, I recognize that we also have that knack to know. And being in the unknown is scary for a lot of us, And so for me, I feel like parents would get a relief when they just simply take some time to forget about the diagnosis, forget about, what the future may or may not hold, and simply just get to know the person that's in front of you. And you will find those strengths. You will find those things that you never knew that they were even capable of doing, And like I said, even throughout my book, I even talk about, like, I didn't know that this kid could do this. And then I find out, right? And also, we place more limitations on our kids than they do. And that's a lot of the forethought and the get to know your kid more than disability, because when you get to know the disability, you will put limitations on that kid based on what you've learned from that disability. And if you haven't yourself experienced other people with the disability that shows you that it goes beyond the book you just read, then you're going to think that that's all that they can do. And if you don't know them and you don't take the time to get to know them more than you get to know the diagnosis, then you will kind of, subconsciously cap them or limit them on their potential. And so when I started, me personally, because again, one of my mistakes that I made turned into a lesson, learned through accountability, is that he started to show way more potential of what he can do when I started being more interested in that versus what I would need to do as a parent to support him having autism. I should have been looking at it, what can I do as a person to support this other person? And again, it is difficult again when it's your child, right? To think about your child is not your kid anymore, not my baby, but another person, another man. He's growing a young man, another man that if I knew on the street, I would approach it the same way. How would I help support that man if I didn't know that if that was not my son, right? So that's, one of my biggest and my favorite, lesson that I got out of writing this book, of talking to parents, of raising my kid on the spectrum as a single father. And I want to say too, which I, give all the praise, accolades, and shout out to his mom. When we both came to that decision to let him stay with me, I would have never learned this much without being right there, right there. A lot of these situations that I speak about in my book, I did not have experience prior to. So I had to, learn on the fly. But, taking on this challenge of raising my kid as a single father, again, I had to learn a lot of things on the fly, unlearn a lot of toxic things that I, remembered from, whether it's childhood, whether it's, just growing up in life, unlearn certain things so I can give him a fair chance, because again, I don't want to cap him. I don't want to limit him. But I had to figure out the ways that I was doing that without, subconsciously. I had to figure out how I was capping him first before I can make sure I stopped it.
Great advice. So if somebody wants to learn more about your work, about the book, or to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Email my first name, DeAndrae, DeAndrae 0315 @gmail.com. You can also reach out to any of us in the Autism Dads Social Club. The website, autismdadsocialclub.org. You can definitely go there and, reach out to our email portion and, send the email out. One of us will get it. And so if they want to talk to me or have any questions for me or just need some advice, they can definitely reach out that way. Also, just keep in mind that all four of us that are in the executive committee, including the three founders, all have an expertise at some sort, whether it's the legal expert, the educational side, they all have some sort of expertise. So, even if it is a question for me personally or something like that, if the issue has something to do with one of their expertises, they will be willing to help out as well. So, yeah, you can definitely reach out to me through my email, Instagram. So, just like look me up there, Facebook, same way, DeAndrae, that's my page. And yeah, I speak to parents all the time. I love talking to parents. I love, if I can help them or be a resource or be able to send them in the right direction. I love that. I love that. I love also feedback. If anyone just wants to send me feedback about my book and let me know, how it impacted your life, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, thanks for sharing. And I'll be sure to include the contact information in the show notes so it'll make it as easy as possible for somebody to follow up. DeAndrae, thank you for your time and many insights. As a reminder, DeAndrae is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. DeAndrae, thanks again.
Thank you. I had a great time.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.